So recently, Miko did a video that I don't particularly agree with. He praised boomer guitars. As the resident Gen Z of ML Sound Lab, I feel like I need to defend myself here and praise the modern guitar somewhat. Now, quick disclaimer before we get into it, this is in no way a personal attack towards anyone. This is not going to be an attack on your gear, your choices, your life, or anything like that. This video is purely meant to be taken in jest. Oh, and I'm going to be using the words boomer and zoomer quite a lot throughout this. Neither of those are derogatory. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it and talk about what a boomer guitar is. Now, taking aside the cultural associations, I'm just going to say the type of guitar that I'd consider to be a boomer guitar is the sort of thing you'd see at a Friday night on a pub with a covers band. They're going to be sort of classic spec guitars with little to no modern accoutrements, very run-of-the-mill, basic sort of things. So I'd say there's a few guitars that are securely in this bracket. This is going to be the Fender Stratocaster, the Fender Telecaster, and the Gibson Les Paul. Now there's also a couple on just sort of the cusp edge of being called a boomer guitar. This is where I'd put the PRS Custom 24 and the Gibson SG. Now the Fender Jazzmaster should really be in this little pocket of guitars given its heritage and its specs, but it sort of fell out of favour with boomers and it's now in the hands of zoomers. So I'd say this has transcended the boomer name entirely just by being a part of the rise of the indie pop girly rock sort of thing. Now you might ask what's wrong with these classic guitars. Obviously they have a major following and are still used by so many bands out there today that they really don't have anything wrong with them per se. Most of the adjustments to these classic guitars have been minor quality of life adjustments over time that have slowly accrued to be something very different from the guitars that they started out as. In my opinion though, all of these modern accoutrements start to really stack up, and there's a night and day difference if you're playing something like a Fender Stratocaster versus something like the Schecter Nick Johnston, for instance. Similarly, I've got my Balaguer semi-custom Woodman here. Obviously this is following the design of the 1972 Fender Telecaster Deluxe, but we've got the colour of the early 60s Fenders. I'll quickly show you what I'm using this for as some Zoomer Architects rip-off metalcore, and then we'll get into the specs of this guitar and what sets it apart from those classic boomer guitars. We'll start with the fretboard radius. This is going to be how flat or how rounded your fretboard is. On typical Fenders you might see 7.25 inches for the more classic ones, or up to 9.5 inches for the more modern ones. Now this Balaguer has a 16-inch radius which is super flat, and I really like that. The rounded fretboard radius means that you've got to have the action quite a lot higher to keep your bends from fretting out. In my opinion, part of a modern guitar is having a nice low action. The actual bridge design hasn't really changed too much over the years, given that we've still got a 6-saddle bridge, we've still got adjustable action and intonation. However, this is a marked upgrade from something like the Gibson wraparound bridges with no adjustments, or even the Fender Telecaster 3-saddle bridges where you've not got too much room for intonation. Also, speaking of bridges, this guitar has the Evertune bridge, which keeps your guitar in tune no matter what by using a series of springs per string. This also means that you counteract things like pitch drift, so when you pluck a note it doesn't go super sharp before falling back down to pitch. This is probably the most major guitar upgrade I've ever seen in guitar, and even then it's still, following those same designs. Fret material is a modern spec that a lot of people hold in way too high regard, but just take it as this. Stainless steel frets on this Balaguer, for instance, will last an awful lot longer than nickel frets on a cheaper guitar. However, there are lower quality stainless steel frets like I've got on some of my Harley Benton guitars that are not as strong as nickel frets, so take that as you will. If we're comparing best of the best stainless versus best of the best nickel, then yes, the stainless is going to last longer. Stainless frets are also notorious for being a lot more glassy to play on. They don't tarnish quite as easily and they polish up to a much nicer shine, allowing a lot smoother bends. Locking tuners is a modern upgrade that I can sort of give or take a little bit. I don't mind the vintage split post style tuners, but I really don't like the classic just string through tuners. Locking tuners allow you to just pull the string through, lock it off, tighten it up and then cut the string. Much faster string changes that way. However, I need to point out here, Locking tuners don't affect your tuning stability like some people would have you believe. If you do find that a set of locking tuners is improving your tuning stability, then you need to look at how you're restringing your guitar. Contours is again less of an issue, but I'm mainly talking about the Telecaster and the Les Paul here. The Strat really nailed the contours right from the get-go. Telecasters and Les Pauls can have sort of hard edges to them that, this guitar does suffer with as a modern guitar, but I've also got a lot of other modern guitars that have got comfort cards in all of these areas. When speccing out this custom Balaguer, I specifically chose a flat top with a hard edge so that I could keep the binding on it because I really like that look. Okay, so we're still going through all of these specs. Next we've got pickups. The original classic pickups in things like the Fender Stratocaster, the Gibson Les Paul and that sort of thing, they're not going to be very hot wound, so they're not going to be great for high output things for metal. Obviously there are great metal tones that can be had with these lower output pickups, but I really like the sound of high output pickups. With modern humbuckers as well, you get the option to coil split, which isn't something that's always been traditionally available on things like the Les Paul, for instance. Onto the truss rod access, this is something that I personally really hate about some vintage guitars, especially Fenders that put the truss rod access in the neck heel. I hate that. I also don't really like it at the headstock. This new spoke wheel design that's been sort of popularised in the last 10 years but has existed long before that, that's really where I find truss rod adjustments to be the easiest. The scale length of this custom Balaguer is 26.5 inches, which is an inch longer than the classic sort of Fender style scale length. This allows me to down tune a little bit easier than something like a Les Paul or a Stratocaster, for instance. Now this is more of a custom thing, and most guitars will fit either the baritone scale length of 27 or they'll fit the Fender and Gibson scale lengths. However, this 26.5 inch scale length isn't something you really see on Fenders at all. So there are a lot of things that have either been half borrowed or fully borrowed from the classic boomer guitars, but putting them all together in a modern guitar is, finding the best of the best. I will say this isn't anywhere near as Zoomer as you can get. I'd say the most Zoomer thing would be like a Strandberg 7-string headless multi-scale guitar. That's something that I've sort of tried before and not really gotten along with. I do go pretty boomer when I spec out guitars. I like my guitars to have a lot of weight to them, which is something that a lot of modern guitars just skip out on. This guitar, for instance, is 9.5 pounds, which puts it among the heavyweights for sure. Now, before I pull out the boomeriest guitar in my entire rack, please drop us a like, a subscribe, a comment, all that good stuff, help us out. There's also links in the description box down below if you'd like to join our Facebook group, which is the main place of discussion for ML SoundLab products. Now, this custom 2004 Tokai Loverock DC2 is the absolute closest thing I have to a boomer guitar. In all sense, it's almost a Les Paul other than the shape. Funnily enough, this one isn't even mine. This is on long-term loan from my dad, who isn't a boomer, by the way. I don't own a Les Paul, a Stratocaster, a Telecaster, or anything that's really in that vein other than sort of modern versions of these guitars. I do like having one classic style guitar around. It really does just complete the look whenever I'm playing sort of classic rock riffs. It's got sort of vintage voice pickups with beautiful coil splits on them. It's got a 24 3/4 inch scale length, which is perfect for E standard, which this guitar obviously stays in. The look is, maybe not my favourite, but a lot of people seem to like this one. I don't love the Tune-o-matic bridge on this since the break angle is so shallow and it's quite difficult to adjust compared to more modern guitars, but once it's set up it's pretty much fine to play. So fittingly, with this boomer guitar in hand, I'm going to talk about the negatives of Zoomer guitars. While I love my Zoomer guitars, there are definitely some issues with owning them and buying them. Firstly, I'll say going for a full custom is a great way to burn your money if you happen to not like it. My Balaguer custom, for instance, cost me about £1,800, and on the resale market this would go for maybe £800, £900. That's a major hit to take, especially when you consider something like a Gibson or a Fender would hold probably 70 to 80% of its value. There's also a similar story, but to a lesser extent, of a lot of off-the-shelf guitars. You know, the ESPs, Schecters, Ibanez, that sort of thing, they tend to hold about 60% of their value. If you're someone that cares about resale value and you're buying a brand new guitar, it's probably better to just go used instead and give yourself that little bit of cushion. They may lose a little bit of value over time as new releases come out. I mean, look at the classic Schecters of the sort of 2004 to 2008 era. Those have really tanked in price as they've fallen out of favour. So what do you think? Do you like the more classic guitars, or are you a fan of the modern stuff? When it comes to the looks, I'm 100% with the boomers here. I love shell pink, I love seafoam green, and I'm not a fan of multicolour fade finishes over 10A top flame maple. I also generally don't like the janky looks of all of the different lines going on when you've got a multi-scale guitar and straight pickups in it. Just, no, I hate that. That said, I love having all of the modern specs, which is why brands like Balaguer really works for me. It makes the guitar a lot easier to play, a lot more stable in general, especially with tuning when you're looking at something like this headstock here, and also it's a lot easier to maintain. Now this video isn't why I won't ever play boomer guitars, it's more just why I tend to gravitate towards more zoomery guitars. I do obviously still love boomer guitars, and there's nothing on this planet that will kill my gas for a 1997 wine red Gibson Les Paul Studio with gold hardware. So thank you so much for sticking this one out to the end of the video. Check out the links in the description box down below if you'd like to purchase any of the plugins you've heard during this demo. All were done with ML Soundlab amped plugins. We've also recently started adding the link to our Facebook group in the description of our YouTube videos. This is a great place to get your voice heard and be a part of the ML Soundlab community. We run giveaways, competitions, polls, all sorts of things like that, and various user questions where you can chat to both me and Miko. So that's everything that I've got for this video. Thank you for watching. I've been Kai.